Eddie, good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you, Joe.
Western 4-7, Lions 54. I find those games very hard to judge. Don't know what to make of them.
Yeah, they're actually impossible to judge because there's such an imbalance in the talent, and then they always show up. If you're playing the Lions, for some of those players, they'll never play the Lions again. It's a day to make a mark, and they always pitch up and they throw their body on the line, but eventually they run out of juice and they get run over in the end. So half time they're in the game, but till 80 minutes it's over, done and dusted, and the longer it goes on, the worse it's going to get. So they're really hard games to value, which is problematic because for the coaching staff, because guys can have a barn burner of a game, and suddenly everyone's got them nailed into a test spot about 3 weeks out, and now you're trying to like that's not the way this works, but you're kind of stuck with that narrative about somebody. So yeah, it's messy, but you do need to get those games under your belt. What you do get out of them is that things that shouldn't go wrong do go wrong. Like restarts on Saturday were a problem. The Lions didn't handle restarts well. In the first half, when Western Force were actually trying to play a bit of rugby and having a crack, as the Australian teams love to do, they looked vulnerable a few times on defence. They got busted a few times. They looked skinny out wide. So they're all things that gives Andy Farrell and the lads like let's get this stuff sorted. If we don't get this sorted, it's going to become a problem. And there's bigger challenges down the line. But yeah, the first game we just file it away as a day at the races, and it is what it is.
Yeah, it's just everything's so heightened. Like against Argentina in the first few moments when Pollock missed a tackle. Twitter is awash with, well, you can't play him. You can't, you're like, everyone calm down.
Yeah. Well, luckily in my day, there was no Twitter. The social media stuff is like just rampant. And at some point, you just have to dial out of it. If you engage with it or you even entertain it, your life's a misery, because there's never, no matter what happens, there's always an naysayers out there. So, you can, and I know, it's part of the media now, social media, which is kind of insane. You think about it. If you told us this stuff 20 years ago, you'd be laughed out of the room, but it is what it is in that respect. And it's hard to ignore it, but you really have to, because every week's going to be another barnstorm or something that's, this is the latest flavour of the week or the hour almost now, because it changes so quickly.
Yeah.
But but the key to the Lions tour is not overreacting or underreacting to stuff. That is the key. It's a steady ship. At the end of the day, you have a better chance of reaching your destination with a steady ship. And if you overreact to stuff or underreact to it, like if you fob off mistakes that you're making that become systemic in the team's performance, whether it's defensive or offensive, and it'll sort itself out. It's not going to sort itself out. And at the same time, if you overreact, like selections can be an overreaction sometimes, and that can get you in trouble. So I've been down that road in 2005, so I saw the good, the bad, and the ugly then.
Yeah. Well, I was going to chat to you a bit about '05 on this edition, if it's not too much of a pain in the backside to talk about it again. So I guess an extension of the point we just made there about everything being heightened and not much, not many sample sizes, and so you can overread into things and overreact. Say, take something like, they were a bit skinny out wide in defence. That can be a consequence of the system that they're playing. Equally, that can just be a consequence of it's a scratch team and understanding and partnerships isn't what it will be in several weeks' time. To bring it back to first principles for a second, we've now seen 2 matches. What would you say to someone who hasn't watched the matches? What brand of rugby, what style of rugby are the Lions playing here? What's Farrell going for?
I think it's no different than what he kind of does with Ireland. It's percentage football. I think there's going to be an element of that. The basics are going to be get out of your half, kick well, contest the football, lock the other team in their half, and don't do anything silly in your own half. Discipline is another one. The Lions were in discipline trouble on Saturday. They could have been more than one yellow card, and so that's another no. You've got to get. And like if you become indisciplined through the tour, it becomes a tag you get, and it influence referees, and they're all things you're trying to manage. So attack wise, they're playing what. The 1-3-3-1 attack that everyone plays by and large. It's nothing spectacular. You just expect you're going to do it much better than the opposition and you're going to beat them. That's really it. There's nothing to say that they're not holding stuff back for the test series. Like if I was in that position, I wouldn't be putting all my chips on the table early doors. I'd be trying to win my way through all the games that lead up to the tests and then pull something off in the test. That would be a curveball in different areas. Might be defensively. Maybe you drift defend, and then on the first test you blitz, or vice versa. They're the things you might play games with because that puts teams in a bad spot early in the game. They've got to figure out a fix on the hoof. There might be obviously line-up stuff they'd hold back. The other stuff you don't hold back is you get your scrum firing and actually you become as dominant as you can as the tour goes on because you're setting down a marker. But they're the things I see. There's nothing spectacularly different. Not to say there won't be something coming out of the hat down the line getting into the test series, but you certainly wouldn't be putting it out this early on the tour. But from what I can see, it's pretty much percentage rugby. We're going to do it better than you are, and we're going to beat you at the end of the day.
Yeah.
The Australians, on the other hand, with Joe Schmidt, are also going to probably come with some curveballs. Joe likes that stuff. He's very good at it. It became kind of his MO early in his coaching career, Leinster and early with Ireland, but then it kind of faded out. He became more rudimentary and predictable in the latter days with Ireland, but that's not to say he wouldn't go. And the Australians like this. They're the underdogs. And, I know a few Australian rugby guys, and they'll tell you that the Australians, for all they don't sweat on losing too much. If they lose, they lose. They just, it is. But what they want to see is the team are really giving it a crack or having a go. So if you watch the Super Rugby teams in Australia, they do lose games, but they have a crack. So they could move the ball from their goal line. And Australian supporters will applaud that. If you move the ball from your goal line and you cough up a try, people go, well, they gave it a crack, mate. That's the attitude. So that'll be interesting to see what Joe Schmidt will come with at the end of the day. So that's the interesting joust for me, is the Lions got something in their locker they're keeping, and I've no doubt Joe Schmidt has. I'll be disappointed if he hasn't.
Okay.
And that would that to me could make the test series very interesting.
Yeah, well, that sounds good. Western forced a lot of the ball first half, got their tries, did okay, and then what we saw at half time was Farrell. The interpretation of the Sky studio was he wasn't happy with breakdown, that these kind of in a jackal position talking to them, and Lions came out with a bit more punch second half. Is that about the gist?
Yeah, I don't know if he was talking about the breakdown. I mean, I remember once being clipped on video doing something, and the commentator at the time was adamant this is what I was talking about, and I wasn't talking about that at all. So I thought it was kind of funny, but maybe it was the breakdown. But I think they were at halftime. If you're in Farrell's shoes, they played pretty well. The Western Force have thrown the kitchen sink at them. This game is still tighter than it needs to be. So it's probably about just getting on with it and getting the basics right. I would think the big thing at halftime for him was two things. Tidy up the restarts after we score. Don't let them into your half after we score. Don't give another shot to get back in the game. And stop giving away stupid penalties. They were the two things at half-time. I would have said is stop giving away penalties and field the restarts and get out of our half, and then we'll be fine. And that's, I think, what did happen in the second half. They kicked on when they stopped giving the Western Force easy entrances into their defensive third.
Joe McCarthy earning plaudits, player of the match, 15 carries, 17 tackles, 2 clean breaks, few turnovers, try. I am seeing contrasting views on whether he can play with Itoje, whether he complements Itoje.
Yeah, there's a couple of dimensions to that. One is it was a big game for Joe, and he certainly put it out there. And that's all he can do. He can keep putting those big performances in, keep banging on the door. Because let's be honest, I don't think if you were picking the Lions before they left, in terms of if you had to pick a test side before you left, I don't know if Joe would have made the test side. I mean, to be fair, I don't think he'd be the top 2 rated locks going into the tour. But what he's doing, and he's every right to do, and what he should do, is keep the pressure on the selectors. And his style of rugby actually is probably very useful against Australia. You need guys who are going to actually rattle other people's cages and carry big time, big tackles, big carries, a bit of an enforcer role. And I don't think Itoje is that anymore. There was a time Itoje was like a bit of an enforcer, but I think he's veered away from that. And also as captain, I don't think he can be an enforcer. You can't be an enforcer and then be talking to the referee about what happened at the last breakdown. So McCarthy is doing the right thing, and you never know. He could play his way in if he keeps doing that, because you do need a guy like that. And a guy like that against Australia is very valuable.
Yeah. On the wings, Van der Merwe got nod first day out, and then James Lowe came in and seemed to go really well. So in a lot of people's eyes, even the English press, British press, which it's interesting to get their view on things, they liked how Lowe played as well a lot. And then Tommy Freeman, a lot of people have kind of rubber stamped, but Farrell singled out Mac Hansen post match. So your thoughts on the wings?
Yeah, again, I think we're maybe going down the rabbit hole we talked about at the start, Joe, about, you know, those positions are so fickle as well because like wings can have great days and bad days, and they usually fluctuate highly. It's and the thing about a wing is you don't want to be have an average day. You need to make a stamp because you're a finisher. It's like a striker. If you go through a games in soccer and you're not even having shots on goal, you're not much of a striker. So you want to have that positive impact. And against teams like the Western Force, you should be having an impact. So whatever Andy Farrell's kind of leading into Mac Hansen on the weekend is it's good for Hansen, but I'm not sure I would, if I was in his shoes, I would have done that because Hansen's Irish. And this is a thing we talked about before is there's so many Irish on the tour. He's got to be really careful with his words. If you're Tommy Freeman and you think you have a shot at the test side and the head coach is talking up Mac Hansen after the first game against the Western Force, you kind of get a cool shiver down your spine that maybe this guy is nailed in as a test. That, and it's not somebody in the media saying it. It's not some of the assistant coaches saying it. It's the head coach is
Yeah.
talking up Mac Hansen. I'm not sure I would have done that. No, I'm not telling Andy how to do his job. He's excellent at what he does. His man management skills are superb. But I thought it was probably an unnecessary situation. He could have told Mac all that in the privacy of the changing room. I said, well done. And coaches do that and they should do that. But if you're another winger on the tour and an Irish winger is getting singled out early doors, and the fact he's Irish, that does play with people's heads a little bit, whether you
Yeah,
like it or not.
I thought that was a really interesting distinction between being the national team coach and the Lions head coach. Because if people didn't see the comment, it wasn't like Farrell was saying, God, isn't it great? He gets his hands on the ball. He's so much skill. He's got my tattoo, my head on his leg. I just love him. I love him. It was singling out a work rate moment from Hansen. And so I
Yeah,
think if he's a national team coach, what he's doing there is saying to the players at large, that's what I value. That's what I want. And I think he's trying to say that to the group, honesty of effort,
I
intensity.
would have said that in
Yeah,
the team meeting.
do it in the meeting. Yeah, because
I would have
there's
said it in
that
the
political
meeting
layer
because,
to it.
yeah, I think there is because if you're a winger on that tour and you're not Irish, we've talked this before, you feel you're one layer removed from your chances. And I say that on the base that there's no evidence that's true and it may not be true. It's your perception as the guy on the tour. So the guys on the tour, like it's an Irish coaching staff. So if you're not Irish, you feel I've just an extra hump to get over here to get in the door on the test side. So I think that's something that I would have kept for the meeting room. I sat people down and take that clip out and said, "This is what we're talking about. This is the work rate we're talking about." And Mac does that great. I think that's very, very, that's very much good coaching in the privacy of, but to publicly now put that out there, now we have a narrative around that already. And why would you want that narrative about that? Because it's just something to people to talk about and bring up the next press conference. And Mac Hansen's going to be asked about the next time he goes to press, and Andy's going to be asked about the next. Like, why create that?
Yeah.
I just thought it was a strange one.
Who do you see in the box seat on the right wing?
Again, I just think it's too early to say.
Okay.
It's way too early to say. Like, I mean, and again, I could have said this about the Joe McCarthy performance. It's relative to the opposition as well. You know what I mean? You've got
Yeah,
to
yeah.
put the context on that. Let's wait until we're looking down the barrel of a couple of games before the first test, and we've seen guys have good and bad days. We've seen guys, and there's a few bolters out there. You know, there's always a bolter on a Lions tour, or most Lions tour. There's always a bolter. The problem, actually, the funny part now for me is that, and you think about it, is that Henry Pollock has been already earmarked as a bolter, so he's
Yeah.
not a bolter anymore,
No.
de facto.
He is box office, isn't he? Like, talk about all action, Pollock.
Yeah, he is, and he's bought into it. I watched his body language coming. Like there's a sense if I was advising him, I'd tell him to cool his jets a little bit, just a little. I like his energy. I like his confidence. He's a phenomenal athlete. He brings great energy. But I watched him coming off the bench in the Aviva against Argentina, and he was pretty hyped up. And I would have thought, well, you're a professional rugby player, just keep it under control. And then I saw him, when somebody makes a mistake, going over, being the leader and tell him he's all right, cool down. Like, he's the new kid on the block. So, don't become the team advisor. Just get on with your game. So, looking at that from me, I think he's definitely box office, but I think, he's a shooting star at the moment and you want to stay where you are. So just stay in the zone, get on with your job and do what you got to do. So if that would be my advice to him, was just to take it down a notch and keep doing what you're doing. You're doing a great job. I'm not criticizing him, but just you can see his energy is getting the better of him at times.
Yeah.
And maybe, in big games that could spill over. Maybe you make some mistakes you wouldn't make if they're overhyped, But that would be my advice to
It's
him.
funny.
Not that he's going to ask my advice.
Did you see the video Northampton released after the Leinster game?
I actually didn't know. I
Yeah,
didn't.
It's funny. I mean, it's a bit disrespectful to Leinster in some respects because they showed half time what was being said, and like a big part of the conversation was like we're more together than them as a team. This kind of stuff was being said. But what was kind of striking is there he is at 20 years of age. Pollock is one of the loudest people, and it's hard to know, but I didn't get the impression there were kind of late 20s, early 30s grizzled pros thinking to themselves, son, just calm it down. You're doing my head in here. I thought they were kind of they were with them on it, Maybe he has a bit of something.
Well, he has. No, I'm not taking that away from him. I'm just saying as context again is important. There's one thing doing that with your club in the changing room with Northampton. It's another thing taking that role on a Lions tour. When you're like you've a handful of caps, you're wet behind the ears. There's guys in there who've been to previous Lions tours, have been to World Cups, have been to the wars. Are you going to be telling them how to get on with their show? That's the thing you've got to watch for. That's where I would say the context to him. I think he's probably a phenomenal leader in Northampton. He's got a role there. People follow him, and he's got that incredible confidence and energy. Sometimes a lot of guys have to get there at that age. They think they can, run into a burning building and save everybody, and they wouldn't get singed their hair. That's the kind of attitude they have, and that's great. But in the Lions context, there's a lot of moving parts in there. There's different personalities. There's very experienced guys, different nationalities. So you have to fit in. It's a kind of thing you need to blend in and stand out at the same time. And the way to blend in is everybody likes you off the field and everybody loves you on the field. And the way to do that is perform on the field and then be humble off the field. That there's that, and if you get a lot of those guys on the tour, and that becomes the culture of the tour, that everybody off the field is genuinely humble, hardworking, gets on together, does what's best for the team, and then you go out in the field and you throw your body in the line. That's what makes Lions tours gel, and that's where the success comes from.
Yeah, it's interesting because they're right beside him, garnering no headlines, but topping the tackle count, being involved in tries, doing his job. Josh van der Flier.
Exactly my point. Van der Flier, who's been in the wars for a long time, just a consummate professional, never says anything, just does all the talking with his actions. He's a phenomenal talent. I mean, I've huge respect for Van der Flier. I mean, my memory of Van der Flier was last year when he was standing in the middle of the field at the final whistle at the Heineken Cup, crying, like inconsolably crying. My heart went out to him, like, because of all the guys, that I've seen play for Ireland and Leinster that deserve success. He is one of them, because he's just phenomenal. He's a phenomenal rugby player. He's a phenomenal talent, and he's a phenomenal attitude. And he's low key. He just does his job. I've always loved that type of player. Completely low maintenance. He just gets on and does it. So that was my biting memory of him crying like a baby, and I felt my heart went out to him for that reason, because he had played his guts out that day, and they just got pipped.
Yeah.
So yeah, that he's the actual opposite to Pollock at the moment, And I'm just saying Pollock could blow this out of the water and be a phenomenon, but he's in a space now where it's not Northampton changing room,
No, it's interesting.
He's got to fit in, and he's got to wait for his moment, and just do his talking on the field. But I mean, I don't want to take away. Again, he's a talent. His confidence is up. He's young. He doesn't see any problems. He'll go for it, and maybe that's what gets him there in the end.
Yeah,
that's my take on it. It's just I'd love to see him cool his jets a little bit, maybe.
Yeah. No, I think it's a nuanced point you're making. I think people know what you're saying. Yeah. And by the way, I just know I underrate Josh van der Flier. Completely take him for granted. Take the professionalism for granted. Take it all for granted. So you kind of love him to get a test berth. There's kind of been a late on appreciation for classy, fluid footballer, kind of can do everything, Elliot Daly.
Yeah, Daly is there for a number of reasons. One is he's a very good test player, very experienced. He's still got some serious gas. He hasn't lost a step, but he can play everywhere. Literally, he can play across the back three, no problem. So that's to me, he was a pretty smart selection. So he generally doesn't make. He's not. He's a bit like he's Keenan-esque, Hugo Keenan-esque, in that he just does his job really well. It doesn't make mistakes, and certainly in Test rugby, that's a pretty good endorsement for a guy going into his game, and he's a good finisher as well. He has gas. People might say maybe he hasn't got the exact same gas he had going back a few years, but I just see he's still a great finisher, very smart footballer, very solid. Can play. The fact for me, the big thing is he can play across the back three, and I'd say at a pinch you could throw him into the centre. It'd be all right. That's something that a coach all in the back of his mind going, yeah, well, maybe we need this. We need this guy in a certain place at a certain time, and he can do it.
Yeah. Well, Hugo Keenan starts on Wednesday. Rory O'Connor is out there, and the working theory on the ground, they've kind of got the word from somebody, or they're just the journalists sitting down working it themselves. The working theory on the ground is that the Wednesday team is actually going to be the bones of the Test team. Just the cadence of the schedule. They've kind of circled the Brumbies game 10 days out as the last good hit out. So that's something to look out for. So Hugo Keenan gets the nod. Tommy Freeman's on the right wing. Bundy Aki's alongside Hugh Jones. And then Van der Merwe goes again. Finn Russell and Gibson Park alongside each other. Conan gets the nod at 8. Jack Morgan, Tom Curry with them. So it's a Toje with Ollie Chessum. And then front row, Keller and Porter. And they've Will Stewart for company. So that's how they're looking at it for the Reds on Wednesday. They beat them by about 10 points in Brisbane in 2013, for what that's worth.
Yeah. Well, the 2013 is probably irrelevant, but well, it's funny. I think this part of it now is that, and I think Andy Farrell referenced this, he wants to get everybody in a Lions jersey and on the field. So I think maybe he's probably mopping up anybody who hasn't got some sort of a start at this point. We're into game 3. So that's going to influence selection. So I wouldn't overread selections and who's getting picked and who's not getting picked. The other thing I say is this is a Wednesday game. So if you look at the kind of the cadence of the tour, ultimately your Saturday games should be your test side. And you go Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday, Wednesday. Early in the tour, that's not as important, but I think after 3 or 4 games, you start focusing in. I'd be more interested on the selection that they're going to face against probably the Brumbies. I would say maybe that's a Saturday game.
Yeah,
that's where you should be settling into your test side. This is probably this is how the dynamic I think should work on Line Store. The first 3 or 4 games, it's open season. Anybody can get picked. Anybody can play, and you get your chance there to make your statement. And after that, then it becomes pretty much to start focusing on the test side. And the things that change the test side are you get injured, obviously, someone's injured, or you start to play, below par, or somebody on the Wednesday side has just blows it out of the water and they make a case for you taking your place. They're kind of the 3 variables. But you do have to start putting your units together, start putting your back rows together, your back 5, your front row, your front 5, your back 3, your midfield. They all have to start gelling now fairly quickly. And again, all the guys involved, all good rugby players, but all great rugby players, but different skill sets, different mentalities, haven't played together before. So I wouldn't read too much into the Reds game. I would think probably the Brumbies probably to me might be the game they really said this is what we need and let's put the Brumbies to the sword. And the Brumbies are a good side, so it'd be a good test for them,
Okay. Look, I'm hearing you loud and clear. It's all very early for any big takeaways.
Yeah.
Is there anyone, as a final one on this, is there anyone you've looked at and thought, wow, surprised me? I know, again, very early doors, could be a genuine bolter who's not Pollock, or no one in particular?
It's hard to say. I mean, I'd be lying if I picked somebody out here and said that they just jumped out at me. And what's a bolter? Probably Pollock was probably the only bolter, and he's actually not a bolter anymore, I think.
Yeah.
But no, I don't think
Well,
so.
that's good too. There's no point saying something for the sake of it.
No, no,
That proves a point.
ask me in a couple of weeks, and I might have a better answer for you.
Yeah. Can I ask you a coaching question before I ask you about a five? Brumbies, 11 minutes into the game, they're 8 metres out. They win a penalty. They have penalty advantage. Straight away, it's kick out over the touchline, trying a kick. This infuriates me. Why, when you get advantage in the 22, do you feel a need to kick the ball away? Why can't they just take a deep breath for a second and think, we have a free hit out here?
Yeah, I don't. To me, that's very poor game management. Now, sometimes was it intentional to kick it out?
Oh yeah, so he was trying to cross kick. He's like, you see it so often. Penalty in the 22, cross kick for a winger, and
the thing that changes there, Joe, is that when you have a freebie, what you do sometimes you try something really audacious, or like you see a lot of guys put crazy grubbers in, or crazy cross kicks, or crazy passes, because they know there's no consequence of it going wrong. Whereas if there was no advantage, you did that, you'd be taken behind the woodshed at half time. But that's what you see, these crazy players, and when they don't come off, they look like, Jesus, what was going through your head? So sometimes guys they know we've got a free player, right? So it's a good question in the sense that, as a coach, I would say, if we have a freebie, okay, let's play a 50-50, not a 20-80. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, listen, this was a 5%er. It wasn't even on. He just felt it was a one-on-one. There was no space like between between Lions player and Brumbies winner, and he just thought, this is just what you do.
Exactly. Like it was one of those freebies that he took like a really low percentage option that was never going to come off. And so that goes back to it's really bad game management. If you get a freebie and you take an option, give yourself a shot at it coming off. Take a 50-50 or 40-60, but don't go, 20-80.
But the ref will give you a few phases in the 22 with an advantage, won't he?
Well, the penalty advantage has gone to hell now in basketball. You could get 10 phases on a penalty advantage.
There's no need to rush. I'd be like, listen, everyone calm down. Because
it's all in your favour. It's all in your favour. There's no reason to make a silly play. But yeah, you do see them at times. Guys get in their head, they've got to pull a complete rabbit out of a hat, and they go for something ridiculous, and it's never going to come off. They know, but I would say, as a coach, I'd be saying to the guy, listen, you just gave away a great opportunity there. You could have done something more constructive that might have led to a score, and you picked the lowest possible outcome, and you played it. That's bad game management.
I had one last one. Then again, I don't know what the coaching wisdom in this. The break Pollock made, and it led to a try for Tomas Williams, and he was going to offload it and went to ground and popped it up lovely to Thomas Williams. When someone makes a break like Pollock, is the advice to everybody in the modern professional game, is it everyone take off after the ball? Or is there a degree of you just turn wherever you are, go straight for the try line, run a straight line for the try line, and let the play come to you as it develops? Or is there a line of coaching on that?
There is. It depends. One is if you can get on his shoulder, like Thomas Williams did, you've got to go. So you're talking about 2 or 3 guys who flood the zone around the player.
Yeah.
You need the guy to take the offload left and right, and you need a guy in case the off doesn't come off who's going to seal the football. Ideally, so you'd have 3 guys, 1 in, 1 out, 1 behind, and they go for it, and then everybody else just gets your width. Because if he doesn't offload, then the next rope you have width on your attack, and there's no way the defense, because they're going to gravitate. The defense is going to gravitate back to where the ball is. That's just human nature, and you have to, because you leave holes around the breakdown, and then that's where the width is easy to score on the width. So the 2 or 3 guys within the vicinity of the line break have to just burn it and get on his shoulder. And that's what Thomas Williams did well. And that's why a lot of scrum halves get great tries. Gibson Park is brilliant. His line, if you watch Gibson Park, every time he passes the ball to the first receiver, he runs upfield. And then he decides after 2 or 3 paces if there's going to be a line break. Yeah. And then he goes back to the ruck. 9 times out of 10, he's right. He's at the ruck when the ball comes out. And he's also right when the line break comes. He's on the shoulder of the line break and he gets a walk in. And that's really, really intelligent scrum half play. They make those reads on the move. Those first 2 or 3 steps are upfield into the backfield, and they make the read, and then they know at that moment if I keep going on a line break or I cut back to the ruck. And they don't miss the ruck either. So you can imagine that takes a fair bit of calibration running at full speed
Yeah,
in a game.
I don't know if I'd tell your local player to try that one because, yeah,
Yeah, yeah. It's a skill you learn that, you initiate upfield because if you don't take those 2 or 3 steps upfield, you're never going to get on the line break.
right,
You're
okay,
just short of it. So you've got to gamble. But the gamble is knowing when to cut back to the ruck and
yeah.
not stay good upfield.
Because
And
if
the
balls
re
present, if balls presented and you've
Yeah,
taken
you're
out,
not there.
where
Yeah,
are you,
you're not
mate?
doing your job.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
you're
interesting. Yeah,
you're Scott.
yeah,
So
yeah.
Gibson Park is a master at that.
Right.
Absolute master.
Because someone on the TV coverage said, like any good scrum half, ran straight for the posts. And I was thinking, surely you go after the ball, but you've kind of explained it
No,
there. Yeah.
after the ball.
Yeah. Okay. Um, so, 2005, Henry Pollock was 6 months old.
Hard to believe, what?
Just 20 years. For people to jog memory, and actually I need my memory jog because I'd forgotten in the first test, which is kind of overshadowed by O'Driscoll's injury, obviously. Only 3 points on the board for the Lions, 21-3 in Christchurch. Second test in Wellington, really kind of comprehensive one, 48-18, a 30-point defeat, and then Auckland to make it 3-0. The first 3-0 defeat in 22 odd years was 38-19. Like, we won't go through this. I'm not going to keep you an hour here going through this in granular detail, don't worry. Can I ask one 44-man tour squad, 20 players from England, obviously World Cup winners, and then 11 from Ireland, 10 from Wales. How hands-on were you in the selection meetings? How much was Clive Woodward taking feedback from everybody else? What was your takeaway from how the squad is put together, the 44-man squad?
Well, I'm going to spend like a minute just explaining something to you
Do.
to understand what happened in '05. Or sorry, yeah, you have to understand what happened in '01. All right, because '01, because I interviewed for that Lions tour. Myself and Clive interviewed for the '05 one, and Clive was always going to get it because they'd won the World Cup, and I was okay with that. I mean, if I'd won the World Cup, I'd expected I'd get it. So anyway, so I know I was happy for him, and I actually got on very well with Clive. We had a very good relationship. I coached under 20s against him back in the day when I was Irish under 20 coach. He was England under 20 coach with Andy Robinson. So I knew Clive well. But if you remember the '01 tour, they won the first series test, lost the second, and then lost the third. And the narrative around the '01 tour was they ran out of players for a start. Like Andy Nichol was on holidays and he ended up on the bench for the third test, right? And they brought 37 players on tour. They didn't bring enough coaches, right? The coaching staff on that tour were Graham Henry, Andy Robinson, and Phil Larder, and Donald Lennon was the manager. In fact, Don Lennon came to me at that time. I was assistant coach for Ireland and said he was going to ask Andy or Graham Henry if I could come along and I would look after the Wednesday side as a kind of a assistant coach. And Graham Henry shot it down and said no, he was happy with the 3 coaches he had. But as it turned out, what started the trouble is that the Wednesday side basically got abandoned because there was so much work had to go in to get ready for Saturdays, and the Wednesday side then felt unappreciated, abandoned, not coached, and there was a kind of a bit of a rot set in. And then you had the breaking news when Matt Dawson and Austin Healy wrote articles and very critical of the tour and the management, and the wheels started to wobble. Then they lost the second test, and then it became really, really a bad experience for everybody, put it that way.
Yeah.
So the general takeaway was that they needed more staff and they needed more players. We ran out of players and we didn't have enough staff. So when Clive got the job, Clive is a kind of a blue sky thinker, and in a complimentary way. He does think outside the box all the time. And there's a great stories about him when he was coaching England doing that, and some of it's quite funny. But his view was that we need a staff that's dedicated to the Wednesday side and a staff that's dedicated to the Saturday side. And there's not enough for us. We need to bring 2 squads. It's New Zealand. There's no easy games. So his logic was actually very good. Like there was logic to that. Let's bring 44 players, 2 squads, 2 staffs, Wednesday staffs, And then the thing grew and grew and grew. So you had 44 players, and there was a huge number of English players on it, 20 English players.
Yeah.
You had 8 coaches then, and the staff, like the whole thing, between 27 staff, 44 players, and it just became like a 3-ring circus. It was impossible to manage it, really. I mean, when we had 2 buses to go training, we couldn't get everybody on one bus, that kind of stuff looked. So it was a large operation. The other thing that a mistake he made is he plucked Alistair Campbell and brought him in. And that was a lightning rod that didn't work out very well at all. So you had all this going on. And then I think the selection side of it was very, very messy. Now, so you have 8 coaches, all right, on it. And at the staff, the selection meetings we had, I think at one stage, 12 or 13 people at selection meetings. You had physios, you had a referee advisor, it was actually Dave McHugh, you had a fitness guy, you had Billy Bowman was the manager. So it was a room full of people trying to pick a team. And it was very unwieldy and messy. And it just kind of never gelled as a tour. And of course, it's probably arguably the toughest tour. And at that time, I think it was because that New Zealand team were like unbelievably strong at that stage. Were just outrageous. Like they came here the following autumn and they just thrashed everybody in the autumn of '05. So we were going into the Lions then, ironically, and we weren't as well prepared. So the coaching became then messy as well. I was working with Phil Larder and Andy Robinson on the Saturday side, and Eugene McGeechan, Gareth Jenkins, and Mike Ford on the Wednesday side. And Clive never took a massive leadership role in the coaching side of it. He didn't sit down and say, "This is what I want." So he left it with us, and nobody knew who was in charge of the coaching on the on the ground on the both sides. Everyone was cutting and pasting on their own. So I think the size of the tour, the fact he kind of let it roll on a bit, it got loose and messy, and then the selection for me was again just a whole messy scenario with so many people in the room and trying to get selections right. And ironically, I was doing an interview 10 years after the tour, so 2015, for BBC, and they had Matt Dawson and Tom Shanklin on, right? And it was interesting that as here the players' take on the tour, their big kind of, criticism was they felt the test side was nailed down too early and that they were just the Wednesday side. They were never going to get a look in and there was a lot of disgruntlement. That actually didn't stand up to analysis because I had the numbers in front of me. I kind of did my research. And if you think of the first test was like the kind of like 1, 2, 3, 4, it's about the 7th game of the tour. So the weekend before, we played Otago and we won 30-19. And we made 13 changes for the test game. So if you would have thought Otago would have been as close to your test side as you got, we made 13 changes. And then the following week, we played Southland, we played Southland for the first, after the first test, we played Manawatu, and we won 109-6, right? And we made another 9 changes for the second test. So now, 9 changes. Now there was injuries as well, obviously, like Brian Driscoll was gone. But for example, talk about selection. Shane Williams, who's a super player, but he got I think 5 tries against Manawatu, and suddenly he's in the test team. Based on the Manawatu. So you could see how everything was beginning to get skewed a bit. And then we lost the second test. We got hammered by 30 points, and there was another 5 changes for the last test. So 13 changes, 9 changes, 5 changes. That to me tells you the story of the selection side of it. It was very unwieldy, very unsettled, too much changes. And I remember that's where I learned the lesson at the time, saying you really need to start identifying your test side, like at least 2 weeks, minimum 1 week out, but hopefully 2 weeks out of the first test, and play them together at least a couple of times. And if there's changes, injuries, but the core of the team are together. We never did that. We never got on the same page. I remember before the first test, the team went to Southland. We all didn't go to Southland. And I took a training session that day for the team. And I put most of the day into doing exits out of our half. And the funny part of it is that Clive's curveball at New Zealand, I think people may have forgotten this because it didn't work, was that he wanted to play a first and second 5/8. His logic was that if we threw this curveball at New Zealand, they weren't good at adapting on the hoof, which he had an argument because when they'd got in trouble in previous World Cups, they actually didn't deal well with it on the hoof. And he thought if we can win the first test with a first and second 5/8 combination, we've a chance. If we win the first test, we've a chance. And that was his thinking. Again, not insane, not stupid. Very good logic to it. So his solution was that for the first test, the other half would be Johnny Wilkinson, and Stephen Jones would be in the centre, and that'd be the first and second 5/8. So I spent I kind of spent that Saturday, because we weren't down in Southland, working on exits out of our half. And I remember Martin Corry came to me and said, "This is great stuff. We really need this stuff. We need to hardwire this during the week." We never did it again. Never happened. And I think putting Johnny and Stephen together in a test game off the bat as a surprise kind of really surprised us more than it surprised the All Blacks. It didn't really work. It didn't fly. So now, we lost our Driscoll. That plan didn't work. We're now on the back foot going into the second test. And second test, we got complete shellacking. So, I mean, you could see the tour beginning to gradually unravel like that. And then the undercurrent in all this was there's two parts of it. One is, I think, Alistair Campbell, the decision to bring in Alistair Campbell, who, again, I have to say, I had spent a good bit of time with him. I got on really well with him. He's a good guy. I had a great relationship with him. He knew his stuff. But there was a pushback against him in general, that he was being kind of parachuted in and taken over the show. And he didn't quite understand the mechanics for it. And that was proven. Actually, we lost the first test, and we were all in the team room after losing the first test during the week. It wasn't exactly, but it was like Tuesday, and Alistair got up and made a speech to the team about guys understanding what it was like to hurt when you lose, and being committed to the jersey, which was like, probably the last guy should make that speech in a team room. He'd kicked a rugby ball all his life, and he's always telling guys how to feel the hurt. I remember sitting there, and Brian O'Driscoll looked at me and kind of went, "Is this really happening?" That was a really bad mistake. I don't know what Clive was thinking, putting him in that position. He could have rallied the troops. So that didn't work, and that didn't help. But I also felt as well that, and I know I didn't had a great relationship with Alistair. He didn't say anything, do anything bad or anything like that. He just was in the wrong place at the wrong time. It wasn't his forte. Was rugby. Was politics. Actually, he left the tour for a week to go back to the election. There was an election, general election in England at the time, Britain at the time. He had to go back with Tony Blair. So he was actually missing for, I think, I could be wrong here, I'm guessing 7 or 10 days, I don't know. But that was a real kind of something that kind of hung around the tour the whole time. And the British media were completely anti it. On top of the rugby media were anti it. And I got a sense as well, which is sad, and I said this before, that there was some of the media, the British media, were actually rooting for New Zealand. They were almost taking pleasure in watching Clive, have a squirming in O'His to Hide on the Lions tour, and then things going down the tube or circling the pan. And so he really wasn't ever going to get a break on that. Like, there was people were waiting for him, and it did go wrong, and he got a horrendous kicking. So there was all that, and that was all apart from the rugby. That whole dynamic around the media were totally anti. That was started before. Once he announced Alistair Campbell, they were anti it, because they felt that Alistair was going to be managing them. That was what he was about. He was for managing the media. That was his raison d'etre with the Labour Party. He was now in power with Blair, and he was now coming in to manage the Lions media, and there was huge pushback on that. And then when it started to unravel, they really went for Clive, and I felt bad for Clive. The guy had won a World Cup, and he'd done a lot of things right. The tour, he didn't get the tour right. No, I'm not saying that. The tour went badly wrong, but there was a fair bit of vitriol around it, and almost a celebration that it went so bad. And I thought that was a bad taste for everybody,
It always struck me that there was a great logic to the decisions he made in advance, and this was almost a test case of, well, we're into professionalism now, and that was Clive's MO in many ways. Let's see if we can professionalize Lions touring. And wise after the event, the 2 buses, the too many players, the rooming alone thing is something so many of them mention.
Yeah.
And I interviewed Clive recently, and he rolls his eye, "Oh, this rooming alone bullshit. Here we go again. Yeah, sorry, I wanted them to sleep." you know, but the camaraderie aspect then is forgotten.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, it's a lot of it is only in retrospect that it's like, well, that none of that worked. But I could see in advance if he was laying it out, you know, with the time saying,
correct.
it's 2005, we're going to do this properly. This is what
Exactly.
professionals expect. I can
Yeah,
see how he made
exactly.
those decisions.
Yeah, and there was a logic to all of that. Unfortunately, there was two things. One, he probably had too much going on. He definitely. I don't think there was justification for 44 players. He could have culled that back to probably 40. And it seems very little, but that's important. He didn't need the number of staff he had. There was a surfeit of staff. And then he became very hands off. I mean, if you're going to, like the old story is, if you're managing three people, you have to be on your. But if you're managing 33 people, it's even harder. So you have to be across everything. You have to be across every detail. And he didn't seem to grasp that. He thought he could set it up and just pull the trigger and let it run, and everything would come together like a well-oiled machine. But I think if and I don't want to talk from, but I probably had it back. He probably would have been much more hands-on in certain aspects of it. And again, I think had he not taken Alistair Campbell and managed the media himself, he's been around the media all his life. Like he's no stranger to dealing with media. He didn't have to do that, but I think that was like lighting a fuse on a bomb.
Yeah.
That this is going to go off at some point. So, but I think he didn't get across stuff in the kind of the more people you have, the more moving parts you have, the more details to look at. You need to get even more granular in overseeing it. You don't have to do everything. It's the old story. As a coach, you don't have to do everything, but you have to know everything that's going on and
Yeah.
how it's done. And
And
there's a subtle but very important difference. But he got almost too detached from the grassroots of it that he did very little coaching at all or gave very little direction on coaching. And that's the thing that I struggle with as myself and Andy Robinson and Phil Larder were like, who's in charge here? Like, I'm doing the attack, Andy's doing the set piece, Phil is doing the defense. Who's calling the shots? Because
yeah.
Clive wasn't in on us. He didn't overcrowd us. He would watch us training. We'd bounce stuff off, but there was no hard directives coming from him. So that's the thing I found very difficult. Like I was assistant coach, I needed that. This is what you need to do. This is what we decide on. You get that done, Eddie. Or I'll get that done. This is what you need, Andy. This is what you need, Phil. La la. Da, la. This is what we agree on. There was none of that coming the minds together. We were never kind of this. I felt we were lockstep as a coaching staff as to what was going on. So I felt we went into those tests, first tests, very unprepared in my view, in terms of technical, tactical, what we want to achieve. For example, me doing those exits the week before, I was using Stephen on one side of the breakdown, and I was using Johnny on the other side, and we were exiting left and right. It was actually creating problems in the backfield for the defence. And Corey saying to me, "Just that's brilliant. I love this. You get it. This is what we need to do more of." But that just dissipated. Like we did nothing that week on that. So you imagine going out on the test. We didn't exit like that. We exited while we exited. And I thought to me, this is like, no, we're not buttoned up as much as we need to be for Test rugby here. And it was almost the whole thing. It got too spread out, too disjointed,
Yeah.
too diffused.
Yeah.
And
Mu-
if I was said to Clive, you needed to get on this more. You needed to be more directive. You need to be on top of things. And I think maybe the whole media stuff was dragging them away from that a bit as well.
And I presume so that, you know, I can imagine for you, coach, knowing this isn't working, this isn't clicking, that's dispiriting. The dirt trackers would tell you they were very dispirited, almost felt disconnected from the tour entirely, albeit McGeechan, as is his way, managed to create a certain vibe there where they had an okay time. But
Well, I think again that was a mistake.
okay,
That was a mistake, and I had a problem with that, and I watched that kind of grow, and I thought Ian overdid that. He didn't like. He started this midweek massive, was the chant midweek massive, and this is going to get the Wednesday team. We're going to be, you know, the kind of linchpin of the tour, and I get the logic in that pulling the Wednesday side together, so everyone's pointing in the same direction, even though they're not playing Saturday. Um, there's a lot of sense to that, but I think it got overhyped. It became the midweek massive one became a bigger talking point than the Saturday side. But the point I made is there was no midweek massive. It was a myth. We had so many changes. We kept making changes all the time. I can go through them. Like we started out. If you go through the games, first game, they had plenty. After 5 changes. The Maoris game, 10 changes. Wellington, 14 changes. Otago, 11 changes. Southland, 14 changes. First Test, 13 changes. Manawatu, 8 changes. 9 changes. 7 changes. At the end of the tour, they started giving out a jersey if you played on the midweek massive. I thought, what are we doing here?
Right.
Midweek, getting a jersey for the midweek massive? What are we talking about? There was probably only think one player didn't get a jersey, so everybody was on the midweek massive.
Right.
You know what I mean? To think about it like that.
Yeah, I didn't realize that because again, the memories plays tricks, or when you
I have
listen.
it written down here. That's
Yeah,
why
no,
I know.
I
I
know
mean, I
you're
would have
right.
forgotten it as well. But just bring it up now when you're trying to.
Yeah, I'd listen to podcasts about it, or the kind of just the residual memory is that like, and you've corrected it, but the memory people would have is there's a bunch of forgotten midweek massive types. They've created a great thing. They're in some ways actually what the lines are all about, the camaraderie, the fun, and Clive is kind of doesn't even know they exist. And they're almost, there's a little bit of a two fingers, like look at us. We're kind of we're so cut off, and we're doing this almost in spite of you, not to support the wider picture.
Well, it was a famous story came out of the Lions tour in South Africa, that famous tour that the starter kind of reignited the whole Lions thing in the modern era, McGeechan and Telfer and the pre-match speech and Everest and all that, is that, there was a game, there was a Wednesday game before the first test or something, and they had to fly up to play somewhere in the high veld, and the team didn't go, it was kind of, was the question, should the team go and support them? But they didn't go, and then they came back. They flew back. It was like 12 o'clock, 1 in the morning. They got into a hotel, and the first team had all stayed up to welcome them into the lobby.
Yeah.
And, that was kind of a watershed moment on the tour. And, Ian McGeechan he was really brilliant at that stuff, getting everybody come together, and he did that brilliantly. And that was his ambition on the Lions in 2005. He was coaching the Wednesday side with Mike Ford and Gareth Jenkins. But I think that it turned into more than it should have been. That's my point.
Yeah.
And there was a point where they probably should have scaled it back, and they didn't, And I mean, I think at the end it didn't help the tour, actually, ironically. And the midweek massive, I think only one or two guys didn't get a midweek massive jersey. So,
Yeah.
how massive was the midweek massive? It was very massive.
You throw in the fact it's communications aren't what they are today. It's winter. It's dark early. Everybody knows this isn't going well, and it's unlikely to improve. You used the word unravelled a few times. There must have been like somewhere after second test, or even after the first test. I'm just imagining like a cloud over the whole hotel, that wherever you're of just like, get me out of here. A lot of people must have been thinking that.
Yeah. It's interesting to say that, because that's one of the Irish players said to me. I won't name him. I met him in the corridor of the hotel, and he looked at me and he said, "Get me out of here."
Well, I'm not saying this is the guy, by the way. In his autobiography, Paul O'Connell weirdly starts smoking in his hotel room on his own. Like he develops a smoking habit.
This is the other thing we talked about. You touched on it, is that guys rooming alone. That Clive's was they shouldn't have any interruptions. They should be able to sleep. And I think that was flawed as well. Like, because sometimes you do need to, if you lose an hour's sleep because the guy snores, okay, you can work around that. But you do need to room with guys you don't know well, and you get to know them. And that's part of building it. The other thing that Clive did as well, and I thought it was, they probably do it now as well, but maybe it's part of the modern, is that there was lots of guys who brought their families in, and that's good too, seeing your family. But it's a bit like, I've always felt like Test rugby is a bit like a boxer getting ready for a bout, Like, you don't see, guys going into boxing bouts, playing with their kids in the corridor before the fight. And I saw, like, one of the players I was going down before the first test. I was going down the corridor, maybe to get pre-match meal or something, and he was in the corridor playing with his daughter, 3 or 4 year old, running up and down. And I'm going, Jesus, you have a test game. There's some guy in a fern on his shirt going to tear your head off in about 3 hours. Are you really in the right headset for that? And it's nothing wrong with having time with your family, but I don't know if 3 hours for a test game is where you have time for your family. And there was a bit of that as well crept in. Again, I don't think anyone kind of thought it through. It just happened, but it didn't help. And so all those things add up, they're all little increments that come together. But certainly it was a very difficult tour. It was hard to get to know people. People were very disparate, spread out. And of course, there was an element of clicks, which happens on online store.
Yeah.
The trick is to break them down. But if things are going bad, those clicks tighten and not loosen, you know.
And when you say everyone's spread out, do you mean just like, okay, there's 60, 70 odd people
Oh
in the
yeah, like
hotel, or you just
yeah,
you go down for where do you,
dinner,
is there a big room for coffee or dinner, or is there a hangout
dinner.
area?
Like this, it's like a banquet. There's like this like you know this like between the staff and that you have 71 people for breakfast, lunch, dinner. It's huge, and like it's like you're working in like a huge building, and everyone's moving around. You don't meet people. You're sitting with somebody different every day, or you're meeting people. You don't with that many people. It's very hard to get to know, 70 other people in a short space of time.
Yeah.
Like so that chat, and I know it's maybe well if you're 10 people less would have made a difference. Probably, yeah, probably in that circumstance. But my memory of it is the tour got very disjointed and disparate and spread out and not connected. And as it went on, it got worse. It
Yeah.
started that way.
Yeah.
So instead of getting tighter, it got looser. And that was probably the undoing. And plus the fact, I always remind people, we were playing the best team on the planet at that time at home in their backyard for 3 tests. And that team, had the World Cup been on that year, they would have walked it. Now, 2 years later, it didn't work out for them. They as it happened to New Zealand, World Cup after World Cup after World Cup, they got it wrong, the cycle wrong. They were at their peak in all those years between World Cups, and then they fell apart in World Cups. So let's be honest, we were going into the Barn of Whale in a big way, going down to New Zealand in '05.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that everything needed to be right to have a shot. And we certainly didn't get everything right. I was part. I say Clive took the hit, but I was part of it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And one last one to kind of circle back to the point you made at the very start of our chat. To what extent was the English coach with 20 English players, that political element, the Mac Hansen point we made earlier, you obviously felt that or sensed that, or that seemed to be on your mind when you were making.
And it wasn't just the players, Joe. It was the staff. There was a lot of English staff. Like there's 27 staff, right? So a lot of those were English staff, like medics and that, physios, masseurs. Now, they weren't all, let's be fair, there were sprinkling, but there was a very strong English, footprint on the tour, like we have now with the Australian tour. And that, I don't care what anyone says, as a player, that does play on your mind a little bit. You do feel I had a little bit extra edge to get over the hump, and it may not be true at all. That's not my point.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
the perception that you deal with, and if things start to go wrong, then that's where the cracks start to appear, and they did appear in New Zealand fairly quickly, to be honest.
Right. Okay. I can imagine. Very interesting. Right. Thanks for reliving that again. 20 years on.
I'd be going to counselling after, trauma. I thought I got out of trauma after 20 years. I'm joking. No, it was tough time. It was a great learning experience. Great learning. I mean, even though it didn't go well, I learned a lot on it. I learned a little about things you could do better, things that you'd never do. That's all part of it,
Yeah.
to be fair. So I was tough. I felt bad for Clive. I thought he had a tough time. And I've always respected him. I think he's a lost to rugby, I must say.
Right.
He was always kind of a blue sky thinker, always thinking outside the box. Not everything he came up would work, but he's certainly an interesting guy to listen to. I've always enjoyed him.
For sure. Okay, that is our rugby for today. Eddie, really appreciate it. Brilliant stuff. Thanks a mil.
Thanks, Joe. I enjoyed it.